It was supposed to be just another day, nothing extraordinary, just the usual rhythm of my life. I was sitting at home, casually going through some emails when my phone buzzed in my hand. The familiar vibration shook me out of my thoughts. It was a message from my wife, Sarah. We'd been married for years. While things had been a little off lately, nothing prepared me for what I was about to read. I opened the message, my eyes locked onto the words, my heart dropping into my stomach. I want a divorce. Stared at the screen, frozen for what felt like an eternity. The message didn't make sense. Sarah was at a work conference, her first big one in months, and I had just texted her this morning, excited to hear about her day. But this wasn't part of the plan. This wasn't something we had talked about, something we had ever prepared for. My hand trembled slightly as I set the phone down, the screen still glowing with her words. I couldn't make sense of it. A divorce. In the middle of a conference? A quick cold text? What had happened? What was she thinking? I felt the air leave my lungs, as if I had been sucker punched. The words kept replaying in my mind each time. More real, more suffocating. Just as I was about to process this, another notification popped up on my phone. My bank's mobile alert. Notification I never expected to see. It was from our joint retirement account. The balance was gone. Every cent. I blinked, trying to process the words, trying to understand if I was seeing this correctly. The money. The safety net we had worked so hard for, the years of savings, the foundation for our future, wiped out. Gone. Just like that, my breath caught in my throat as my mind raced, spinning with questions that didn't have answers. How could she do this? How could she just leave me like this, both emotionally and financially? I reached for my phone again, hoping to understand what had happened, why this was happening. I didn't even know where to start. A divorce and financial devastation, all in one message. This wasn't the life I thought I was living. This wasn't the marriage I thought I had. I sent a message back, but my hands shook as I typed, unsure of what to say, unsure of how to even begin making sense of this. But no matter what I typed, the truth was already there. The life I knew was crumbling, and there was no stopping it. I sit there, staring at the phone in my hands, the weight of Sarah's words sinking in deeper by the second. I can't help but think back to everything we've been through, to the years we spent together building a life. This wasn't just some passing phase. It was a life. Our life, one I thought was solid, unbreakable. I remember our wedding day like it was yesterday. I stood there in front of all our friends and family, eyes locked with hers, and I truly believed there was nothing we couldn't overcome together. We had a future, plans, dreams. We were in sync, sharing the same vision for where we'd go, what we'd do. We were a team. The first few years were a whirlwind, like they always are. But even as the pace of life picked up, work, responsibilities, bills, we never lost sight of each other. At least that's what I thought. We had our quiet Sunday. Mornings, our walks through the park, family vacations that felt like magic. I remember the time we went to the beach for a long weekend. Just the two of us laughing at nothing, talking about everything. The sun on our faces, the salty breeze in the air, and for a moment, everything was perfect. We were happy, carefree, and there was no sign that the storm was coming. But it didn't stay that way, did it? The cracks began to form slowly, so slowly, that I barely noticed them at first. Small things, little moments that should have been red flags. A comment here, a moment of silence there. I started noticing her staring off, lost in her thoughts during dinner. Or the long hours she'd spend at work, claiming it was just the pressure of the new project. I convinced myself it was just stress, nothing to worry about. After all, life was busy. Both had our careers to focus on, dreams to chase. I thought that was enough. But there were the quiet moments too, the ones I didn't want to address. The late-night arguments that always ended with an apology, but never a real conversation. She was quieter than usual, more distant. I would ask her if she was okay, and she'd smile, reassure me that everything was fine. But even then, I felt the distance between us. Still, I told myself it was nothing, just a rough patch. We'd get through it. We always did. I think back to the last family vacation we took. We went to the mountains, a place we both loved. It was supposed to be a break, a time for us to reconnect. But something was off. I saw her checking her phone more than usual, excusing herself to take calls. I didn't say anything at the time, telling myself I was being paranoid. She said it was work, and I wanted to believe her. But I can't help but wonder now, was she already mentally gone? She was always so good at hiding things from me. Little things that I overlooked, shrugged off, or convinced myself were just part of the normal ebb and flow of life. She was my wife, my partner. I thought we were in this together always. But now, as I sit in the aftermath, I can't help but wonder how long she had been planning this. How long had the cracks been widening? How many signs did I ignore? I thought our marriage was strong. I thought we had built something solid, something that would last. But now, in the silence of my home, with only her absence and the sting of her message echoing in my mind, I'm left to wonder if I ever truly knew her at all. It wasn't an abrupt change, not like flipping a switch. At first, I barely noticed the shift, chalking it up to the usual stresses of work, family, and life. But now, looking back, I realize the signs were there all along, hiding in the cracks I ignored. The moments that should have stood out, those small shifts in her behavior, were easy to miss at the time. But they were there. I started noticing the late nights. First, it seemed like just another demanding project at work, another deadline. That had to be met. She'd leave early, sometimes even before dinner, and return hours later, tired and distant. She'd mumble something about needing to catch up, or some last-minute task she couldn't avoid. And I believed her. I always did. But as time went on, it started to feel like more than just work. She wasn't herself when she came home. The warmth that had once greeted me after a long day had become something colder, more distant. She'd be there physically, but it was as if her mind was somewhere else. The conversations we used to have, where we'd talk about everything from our hopes to the day's little absurdities, had turned into short exchanges, like we were to strangers, passing through each other's lives. And then there were the late-night phone calls. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of her talking softly in the other room, her voice hushed, but not enough to hide the strange, almost urgent tone. She always looked startled when I walked in on her, quickly muting the phone, or hanging up, acting like it was no big deal. She'd just say it was a work call or a friend needing advice. And I'd brush it off, telling myself I was overthinking things. But the pit in my stomach grew heavier every time. I tried to reach out, tried to make our time together feel like it used to. I'd initiate a conversation, ask how her day had been, but more often than not I was met with a polite smile, and a quick response that felt rehearsed. Laughter that once filled our home was replaced by silence. It wasn't that she was angry or upset, it was just a kind of quiet that I couldn't place, a coldness that I couldn't break through. One evening, I sat in the living room, waiting for her to come back from another late meeting. The house felt too big, too empty. The soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the background. I scrolled through my phone, trying to distract myself, but the feeling of loneliness in the space around me was overwhelming. When she finally came in, she was on her phone, texting. She didn't even notice I was there at first. I watched her for a moment, her eyes glued to the screen, a frown forming on her face, her fingers quickly typing away. I felt a wave of unease wash over me, the silence between us palpable. She finally looked up. Our eyes met for a brief second, and I forced a smile. "How was your meeting?" I asked, trying to break the tension, but my voice felt hollow. "It was fine," she replied, distracted, still looking at her phone. "I'm just tired." She didn't even put the phone down. It's the same phone she had been using. For late-night calls, for secret conversations I wasn't privy to. The same phone that had become a barrier between us. I wanted to ask, to confront her, but the words wouldn't come. Every time I tried to reach out, it felt like I was pushing further away. So I sat there, silently watching her, feeling more disconnected than I ever had before. It all started so subtly. Little things at first, things I could easily brush off, tell myself, were just part of the usual ups and downs of life. But with time, those little things began to pile up, and suddenly, I found myself wondering whether I had been too blind to see what was really happening. The late nights were the first sign. At first, I didn't think much of it. Sarah was a hard worker, always pushing herself to be better. She'd come home late, her eyes tired, shoulders slumped. She'd apologize, say she was working late on a big project. And I'd nod, understanding, just happy to see her at all. But soon, the late nights turned into something more and more frequent, more urgent, more distant. It wasn't just late anymore. It was an almost everyday occurrence. I could feel the distance between us growing. Like a small, invisible wall I wasn't sure how to break. Conversations that used to flow naturally now felt stiff, forced. I'd ask how her day had been, and she'd respond, but it wasn't the same. Her answers were brief, impersonal, like she was giving me the bare minimum. We'd sit together on the couch in the evenings, but I felt like I was speaking to a stranger. When I asked her about her day, she would look away, her attention wandering somewhere else. Sometimes she'd pick up her phone, texting or scrolling through social media, her eyes glued to the screen, barely acknowledging my presence. Each time, I told myself it was nothing, just a rough patch, just the stress from work. But the unease grew, and the silence between us grew thicker. I started noticing more late-night phone calls when I was half asleep. Her voice too soft, too. Make out the rapid-fire clicking of keys as she texted under the dim light of her phone. I didn't say anything at first, too afraid of what I might hear if I asked. It wasn't like her to be secretive, but every time I'd ask her who she was texting, the answer was always vague. Work stuff or just a friend. One evening, I sat in the living room, watching TV as she sat across from me, texting on her phone again. The clicking of her fingers against the screen was the only sound filling the room. I tried to initiate a conversation, asking about her day, about her thoughts on the upcoming weekend, but she barely responded. She didn't even look up from her phone. I sat there, feeling more and more invisible as I tried to connect, tried to bridge the gap that seemed to be widening by the second. She didn't even seem to notice the silence that stretched between us, the tension hanging thick in the air. I could feel her retreating further, and the coldness began to seep in as I watched her texting. It was as if I was no longer part of her world. She was physically there, but emotionally, mentally, she was somewhere else. My mind started racing. Who was she talking to? Why did it feel like I was losing her bit by bit? I wanted to ask. I wanted to confront her, to ask what was really going on, but the words stuck in my throat. Gosh. I was afraid of what the answers might be. I didn't want to hear them, but I couldn't stop wondering. The more I watched her, the more I realized how disconnected we had become. In that moment, as I sat across from her in silence, I felt a pang of fear. It wasn't just about the late nights or the secretive texts. It was about the person she had become, the person I couldn't reach anymore. I couldn't ignore it any longer. Something was changing, and I wasn't sure I was ready to face it. It was supposed to be a normal afternoon, just like any other, but it quickly turned into the most goat-wrenching moment of my life. I had been avoiding the full consequences of Sarah's text, the "I want a divorce" message that still lingered in my mind, but today, it all came crashing down. I had just finished a long day of work and sat down at the kitchen table, opening my laptop to check on some bills and the current state of our finances. The silence of the house felt louder than ever, the absence of Sarah more palpable with each passing moment. I thought I could get a handle on things, keep everything running smoothly for now. At least that's when I saw the notification. It was an email from my bank. I opened it casually, expecting a routine update, maybe some pending charges or balance information. But as I read the words, my heart stopped. My pulse quickened, and a cold sweat broke out on my skin. Withdrawal notice. Joint retirement account. Full balance withdrawn. I blinked at the screen, reading it over and over, as if the words might suddenly change, might make more sense, but they didn't. The money, the retirement savings we had both worked so hard for over the years gone, the funds we had set aside for the future, for our retirement, for a life beyond work, were now empty. It's completely drained. I sat there, frozen, staring at the email. How? I immediately logged into the account, my fingers trembling as I entered. My credentials. My mind raced with disbelief. This couldn't be happening. Not after everything we'd been through, not after everything I had sacrificed for this family. The account balance showed zero. It was getting every cent wiped out. No warning, no explanation. My mind couldn't process it. How had this happened? Why had she done this? I picked up my phone with shaking hands, trying to find any sign of her. I scrolled through our messages, hoping, praying that there was a mistake, some miscommunication. But there was nothing new. No explanation. Nothing. Asterisk. I stood up, pacing. The kitchen, the weight of what I had just discovered sinking in. I had been so focused on the emotional betrayal, the divorce, that I had completely overlooked the financial side of things. And now it was clear that I had been blind to all of it. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was financial too. The foundation of our future had been ripped out from under me. She hadn't just left me. She had taken everything. And with that single action, she had stripped away any sense of security I thought I had left. I tried to call her, but the phone just rang. When she finally picked up, her voice was cold, distant. "I'm not discussing this right now," she said before hanging up. My chest tightened as I stood there holding my phone. I couldn't breathe. I had been left in the most complete way possibly, emotionally and financially. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I had built my life with, had taken everything and walked away without a second thought. I stared at the empty account, the balance I had worked so hard to build, knowing that it was no longer mine. My anger surged, but it was clouded by an overwhelming sense of loss, of disbelief. This wasn't just a divorce, it was the complete dismantling of everything I thought we had. I could feel the weight of it all in my chest, as if the world had suddenly become too heavy to bear. How could she do this to me? To us? And in that moment, I realized the truth. This wasn't just about a broken marriage. It was about being robbed of everything I had worked for. The house felt emptier than ever. Every room once filled with the noise of family, laughter, and life, now seemed to echo with silence. The walls, once warm with the memories of shared dinners and quiet nights, felt cold and hollow. I wandered through the house, aimlessly, like a ghost in the life I once knew, unable to grasp the reality that had suddenly shattered my world. I kept checking my phone. The notifications, the empty accounts each time I looked at them, it felt like a new blow. Is this real? My eyes scanned the figures, hoping to see something different. Something that might explain this sudden, heartless withdrawal. But the numbers remained the same, empty. My mind couldn't stop racing. How had we gotten here? How had everything fallen apart so quickly? Just days ago, I was texting Sarah about her conference, about the things we had planned for the future, for our retirement. We were building something. We were a team. But now I was standing in a house full of memories. All I could feel was the sting of betrayal. I passed by the empty living room, where we'd spent so many nights together, watching TV, talking about our day. There was nothing but the silence. Now I sat on the couch, trying to make sense of it, but every attempt to understand only made the confusion worse. How could she do this? After everything we had been through, after everything we had built, how could she just tear it all down? I could feel the numbness settling in like a heavy weight. It wasn't just the betrayal of the money, it was the loss of her. The woman I had trusted, the woman I had shared my life with, had suddenly become a stranger. I was left here. Alone, trying to pick up the pieces, I walked into the kitchen. The place we had spent so many quiet mornings together, making coffee, talking about our dreams. But now even the smell of the coffee seemed to mock me, reminding me of the life I thought I had. I opened the cupboard. Staring at the mugs we had collected over the years, each one a small memento of the life we shared, I ran my fingers over one of them, and for a moment, it almost felt like everything was normal again. But as soon as I put it down, the harsh reality of the empty space around me hit me all over again. I moved through the house, checking everything again, hoping for something I had missed, but there was nothing. No sign of Sarah, no explanation, no answers. Just empty rooms, silent walls, and a life that felt like it had been erased in an instant. I stood in the hallway, staring at the front door, the place where we had welcomed so many guests, where we had started so many new chapters. Now, it felt like I was standing at the threshold of a life that was no longer mine. How did this happen? I couldn't answer. I couldn't understand. I just stood there, staring out the window at the world that had moved on without me. My reflection, in the glass staring back at me like someone I didn't recognize. The life I had known was gone, and I was left standing here, trying to figure out who I was without it. The silence of the house was deafening, but it was the emptiness that hit me the hardest. Sarah's absence felt like a vacuum, sucking every bit of warmth and comfort from the space we once shared. I couldn't escape it. The house, once full of life, now felt like a mausoleum, a place where everything I had known, everything I had built, lay buried under the weight of betrayal. I couldn't sleep. No matter how many times I closed my eyes, the thoughts kept racing. How did we get here? Why didn't I see it? Each thought was louder than the next, a cacophony of grief and anger I couldn't escape. Every time I tried to close my eyes, all I could see was her face when she told me, the coldness in her voice, the empty look in her eyes when I asked her why. And when I thought I had the answers, the next wave of confusion hit, drowning me all over again. The bills were piling up, just another reminder of how far I'd fallen. They lay there on the table in front of me, documents I couldn't bring myself to open. Every envelope felt like a reminder of the life I had lost, the future I thought was secure, now slipping through my fingers. How could she do this? The thought repeated in my mind, but there was no answer. Just silence. I sat there, frozen, staring at the bills. The weight of the financial strain felt suffocating. The retirement accounts I had worked so hard to build gone. The future I had envisioned, the security I had counted on for us, it was all gone. I wasn't just grieving the loss of Sarah. I was grieving the loss of everything I thought we had. Everything I had worked for, everything we had shared, was now gone, replaced by an overwhelming sense of loss. Tears began to fall. I didn't try to stop them. I couldn't. The anger, the confusion, the heartbreak, all of it came rushing out in a flood of emotion. I had never felt so lost, so alone. I felt like I was drowning, but no one was there to pull me back. I had trusted her, given her everything, and now I was left in this empty house, with nothing but memories of a life that had been ripped away from me. I collapsed onto the couch, curled up in the dark, the quiet pressing down on me. The house was silent, but inside my head, it was chaos, louder and sharper, bouncing off the walls. How did she leave? How could she leave? How could she do this? I felt the weight of the loss, not just of the money, but of her, the woman I had loved, the person I had spent my life with. The house that once felt like a home now felt like a prison. Every corner, every room was a reminder of everything I had lost. I closed my eyes, but it didn't help. There was no escape from the pain, no escape from the fact that she had taken everything, emotionally, financially, and mentally. I was alone, and I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to move forward from this. I was broken. The morning light streamed through the window, but it didn't feel warm. The house felt colder than ever, like a reminder that the world outside had kept moving, but my life had come to a screeching halt. For days I had tried to ignore the reality of the situation, to pretend like I could somehow wake up and find everything back to normal. But it was clear now, nothing would ever be the same. I had spent hours staring at the phone, wondering if I should call Sarah, but I knew it wouldn't help. She had made her decision. I had to face it. I had to move forward. Even though it felt like the ground beneath me was slipping away with every passing second, the first thing I did was contact a lawyer. It wasn't something I had ever thought I'd have to do, but here I was. The conversation was cold, clinical. The lawyer asked all the right questions about assets, property, the retirement accounts, but with each one, I felt a new layer of devastation settle in. She had taken everything, and now I had to pick up the pieces, no matter how painful it was. As I sat in the lawyer's office, the weight of everything hit me all at once. The divorce, the financial ruin, the life I had spent years building, now gone. The lawyer spoke about the next steps, about how we could handle the divorce proceedings and how to protect myself moving forward. But I couldn't focus. My mind kept going back to the empty retirement accounts, the house I had once thought would be our home forever. All of it felt like it had been stolen from me. I called the bank next, couldn't get the accounts back, but I had to try. The representative was polite, but there was nothing they could do. Funds had been transferred, and the damage was done. I had to start from scratch, rebuilding from a place I never thought I'd be. I couldn't believe it. I had always been careful with our finances, always made sure we were secure. And yet here I was, vulnerable, exposed. The call ended, and I sat there in the silence of the office, trying to breathe. This was my new reality. There was no going back. I had to start from zero, emotionally, financially, mentally, and it was going to be a long, painful road. But it had to be done. I couldn't keep living in the past. I had to face what had happened and figure out how to rebuild. Back at home, sat at the kitchen table, staring at the documents in front of Mitha, legal papers, the bank statements, the letters, aid. Each one felt like a reminder of the life I had lost. The empty savings account, the divorce papers, everything felt like a weight on my shoulders that I couldn't shake off. But it was clear now that I had to move forward. I couldn't afford to look back. The past was gone. The future was uncertain. As I sat there, the harsh reality of everything hit me with full force. There were no shortcuts. There was no magic fix. I had to go through the motions, the painful, difficult motions of rebuilding. I picked up the phone again. I called a financial advisor to start the long process of recovering. I didn't know where to start, but I knew I had to try. For the first time in days, I felt something close to determination. It wasn't much, but it was something. The journey ahead wasn't going to be easy, but I had no choice. I had to face it. I had to keep going. I had spent days, no, weeks, in confusion, replaying every moment with Sarah in my mind, trying to piece together how we had gotten here. But now, I couldn't ignore it any longer. I needed answers. I needed to know why. I had tried to reach out to her before, but she had been distant, cold, and now all I had left was this confrontation, this moment that would either give me some sense of closure or push me further into a place I didn't think I could go. I stood outside her, apartment tower, apartment hand. For a brief moment, I considered turning around, but I couldn't. I had to face her. I had to ask her. She answered the door, her face as emotionless as ever. It had been weeks since we'd had a real conversation, and now that we were standing here, face to face, I realized how much I had missed her, and yet, in the same breath, how much I had lost. She looked at me, her eyes betraying nothing. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice flat, almost indifferent. "I want answers, Sarah. I want to understand," I said, my voice barely above. A whisper, but the tension between us was already thick. "Why did you do it? Why did you ask for a divorce and take everything? The retirement funds, the savings, everything we worked for." She stepped back slightly, like she was ready for me to accuse her, but she didn't say anything. I pushed forward, the frustration and anger bubbling up inside me. "You drained our accounts, Sarah. Why? After everything, after years of being together, of building a life, why would you just throw it all away?" Her eyes flickered, but she quickly masked any trace of emotion. I needed to do it. I didn't want to, but I had to. You weren't listening to me anymore. I froze. Listening. Was that really the reason? Wait. I had spent years trying to support her, trying to make her feel heard. But now it felt like nothing I had done mattered. I wasn't listening. I repeated, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "I gave you everything, Sarah." "Is everything, Anne? Now you're telling me you did this because I wasn't listening? You didn't think I'd notice you pulling away? You didn't think I'd notice you texting on your phone at night? What about us, Sarah? What about our life?" She stepped back again, her face hardening. "I tried, okay? Really did, but you weren't there for me. You were too wrapped up in your work and your life. I felt alone. The words hit like a punch to the gut. I could feel the anger rising, but underneath it, there was something else hurt. So you thought this was the solution? You thought taking everything was going to fix things? I didn't know what else to do. She raised her voice, but it was tinged with regret. You don't understand. I was miserable. I felt trapped. I had no way out, and I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I had to leave. Had to be free. Her words hung in the air, and I felt the weight of them settle deep inside me. There was a part of me that wanted to scream, to demand that she take responsibility for everything, for ruining everything. But there was another part of me, the part I didn't want to admit, that felt pity. I didn't know you felt that. Way, I said quietly, my voice breaking. The rawness of the situation hit me like a wave. I didn't know you were that unhappy. I thought we were building something together, Sarah. I didn't think I was losing you. She shook her head, her eyes avoiding mine now, the silence between us stretching. I didn't want this. Really didn't. But I needed to leave, and now it's done. I stood there, rooted to the spot as she walked toward the door, as though she was already walking away from everything we had. I opened my mouth to say something, but the words got caught in my throat. The truth was, I was empty. This conversation, this confrontation, none of it had given me the answers I needed. I wanted closure, but I wasn't going to get it from her. The door clicked shut behind me with a cold finality. And for the first time, I realized there was no going back. This was the end. The days that followed felt like an endless fog. Through them like a shadow of myself, not fully aware of where I was or what I was doing. But then, slowly, the fog started to clear. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't easy. But something within me shifted. It was the smallest of movements, like a single breath that broke the suffocating silence. I started with therapy. I had never imagined that I would need help to get through something like this. But as I sat in that room for the first time, the weight of it all became too much to carry alone. The therapist's calm, steady presence was a lifeline. She didn't give me answers. No one could do that. But she gave me the space to speak, to say the things I had buried. My anger, my sadness, my confusion, it all came rushing out. And with each session, I felt a little lighter, a little closer to finding my way back. One evening, after a particularly draining session, I found myself staring at the gym sign across the street. It hadn't worked out in months, maybe longer. I had spent so much time focusing on everyone else and Sarah, on the future we were supposed to have, that I had forgotten about myself. That evening I stepped inside. The first few days felt like a struggle. My muscles ached in places I'd forgotten existed, but with every drop of sweat, I felt something inside me slowly begin to shift. It wasn't about getting my body back. It was about getting me back. Each rep, each mile, was a reminder that I could still take control of something in my life, even if it felt small. It was my first step in regaining strength. Not just physical strength, but emotional strength. I reached out to friends, people I hadn't spoken to in a while, but who had always been there for me. They rallied around me, offering their support without question. It felt strange at first to open up, to admit just how broken I was, but they listened, and slowly, I started to heal in ways I hadn't anticipated. There was laughter again. There were moments of joy that I didn't think I would ever feel again. I remembered that I wasn't alone. And maybe that was the most important thing I had forgotten during the months I'd spent in isolation. I wasn't alone. I had people who cared. I also started rediscovering old hobbies, things I had pushed aside for so long. I pulled my guitar out of the closet, the one Sarah had bought me for our anniversary. The strings were rusty and the sound was off-key, but it didn't matter. It felt good to play again, to lose myself in the rhythm of the music. I also picked up my sketch pad, something I hadn't touched in years. The first few drawings were childish, crude even, but it didn't matter. It was the act of creating something again, something that was mine and mine alone. Slowly, I began to reclaim pieces of myself that I had forgotten. It wasn't about forgetting Sarah or erasing what had happened. It was about learning to move forward, to rebuild myself from the ground up. Slowly, I started to see my own resilience, my own strength. There were still days when I wanted to give up, days when the anger and the hurt would come rushing back. But the more I focused on healing, the more I realized that I had the power to shape my future, to rebuild it the way I wanted. The journey wasn't linear. It wasn't clean, but I could feel myself growing stronger, more resilient. Each day felt like a new step forward, even if it was just a small one. I had begun to find myself again, piece by piece, and the more I did, the more I realized that there was a life waiting for me on the other side of all this pain. It's strange how the world keeps moving when everything inside you feels like it's frozen. In the days, weeks, and months after everything fell apart, there were moments when it felt like the world had stopped turning. But the truth was, life doesn't wait for you to heal. It keeps going, relentlessly, forcing you to keep up. Now, as I stand here, looking back on everything, on the pain, the betrayal, the heartache, it's hard to believe I've come as far as I have. There are scars, of course, some deeper than others, but I've come to accept that they're a part of my story now. They're not just reminders of what I've lost. They're also proof of what I've survived. I've accepted the betrayal. It's hard to admit, but it's true. I spent so much time fighting it, trying to understand why it happened, looking for answers from someone who could never give them to me. But the truth is, the answers didn't matter anymore. What mattered was how I chose to move forward. How I chose to rebuild myself. I had spent so much of my life tying my worth to my marriage, to my career, to the life I thought I had built. But I've learned that my worth isn't defined by any of those things. It's defined by who I am, by my resilience, by my ability to rise from the ashes, and by the lessons I've learned along the way. There are still days when I think about what could have been, when the anger and the sadness threatened to take over, but those days are becoming fewer. I've forgiven Sarah not for her sake, but for mine. Forgiveness is a gift I gave myself, a way to let go of the bitterness that had started to eat me alive. It doesn't mean I condone what she did, but it means I've chosen to move forward without carrying that weight with me. The future feels different now. It's uncertain, yes, but it's also full of possibility. I've spent too long in the past looking back at what I lost. But now I can finally look ahead. With a clearer mind and a heart that's healing, I stand at the edge of a new beginning. And for the first time in a long while, I feel a sense of peace. The world may have knocked me down, but I've learned to get back up. I've learned that I am stronger than I thought, and I have more to offer than I ever gave myself credit for. As I stand here, looking out at the horizon, I know that this is just the beginning of something new. The journey I've been on wasn't the one I imagined, but it's mine. And I'm ready for whatever comes next.